Hi folks, Officer Coy, Ann Arbor Police Department with another episode of Arbor Shield. Today on the show we have Officer Jim Boylan and Keith. Today's subject, I hope, is really going to be informative, not only for the audience obviously, but that we're able to have some good dialogue, honest dialogue about the subject matter at hand. And I think both of my guests can share their perspectives, and I'm sure that the audience is going to appreciate it. So why don't we start off with a little introduction, and I'll give you guys time to think a minute, because I'll cut to myself on the subject of drunk driving. So I was a officer prior to here in a small town for about 3 years, and in most small towns your call load isn't what it is in major municipalities for obvious reasons. So you either are bored for 8 hours a shift, or especially if you're a brand new officer like I was, you create your own work, so to speak. So what I really enjoyed actually was finding and arresting drunk drivers. And right now I'm assuming that there's a segment of the audience that's probably saying, oh, that's terrible that he would enjoy ruining somebody's life and taking their freedom and yada, yada, yada. But I never looked at it like that. I always looked at it like I was saying, being lives, to be honest with you. It may sound a little melodramatic, but after you hear some of the stories, we look at some film clips, you realize that what I'm saying is true, that it's not about putting the handcuffs on somebody and taking somebody to jail as much as it is going home at the end of your shift after arresting a drunk driver thinking, you know what, it felt good. It felt good to take that person off the road, and somebody got home safe tonight that wouldn't have otherwise, maybe even the drunk driver himself. So I enjoyed it a lot, especially in the early mornings I would park at a certain location off the freeway in the shadows and just watch the stop signs. And I became relatively skilled, I guess, at observing just minor traffic infractions, and then following the subject and watch all the different things that would happen as I got behind them. So that's my little take on drunk driving. So I offer no apologies in enjoying taking drunk drivers off the road. So having said that, I will turn to Jim, and maybe you can, I don't know, tell us why. I mean, I picked you because when I asked at the department, hey, who really enjoys arresting drunk drivers or gets satisfaction out of taking drunk drivers off the road, your name popped up.
Yep.
So here you sit, and I appreciate you being here. Yep. But maybe you could just share a little bit about your career, how you started in the whole drunk driving thing.
Well, again, I appreciate you inviting me here. Again, my name is Officer James Boylan. I've been here with Ann Arbor for about 3 years. Prior to coming to here, I worked for a small department part-time on the west side of the state. Mm-hmm. So obviously not a whole lot going on there, but even there I did take an interest in OWI enforcement, just learning the ropes. It was good, just base knowledge before coming here. More of my educational background, I went to Ferris State. I got my bachelor's degree from there. Also got my master's from Ferris. So Ferris was great education and helped build the education that I had before coming here, especially the OWI component of that. So I guess just briefly, the main reason why I do the OWIs is because, like you said, I like knowing that I made a difference by taking an unsafe driver off the road. Either he could have hurt himself, a pedestrian walking on the road, because there are a lot of them downtown, especially when the bars close. Intoxicated people walking down the sidewalk plus intoxicated drivers, yeah, usually is not going to end up well. Right. And it's just it's very challenging at some point, because you have to deal with these people. You have to make those decisions to where I think there's something else going on with this person, so I might press this issue and do my OWI investigation further. And I've done that plenty of times where people have said, I've had a couple beers, I've went out and done my test, and turns out they were totally fine. Mm-hmm. Just kind of not a great sober driver. So I deal with a lot of not great sober drivers as well. but
Good point.
they're
That's a very good point.
they are out there. So, and that OWI is just a solid foundation to separate those not great sober drivers from the actual intoxicated ones, because usually a lot of people driving around, 2, 3 at night are on some type of, something not they're not supposed to be. So, I guess we'll cut there. kind of trailed off there. So.
Well, as you were talking, and I want to get to our guest here, Keith. As you were talking, and I don't know if you ever did this, but back in the day, MSU had a class. I don't recall what it was. It was a 3-day OUIL class, and I took that from Dr. Bird. And part of that class required you to consume alcohol to get to a certain BAC or blood alcohol content level. And prior to that, like everybody else, I would arrest drunk drivers. I think back then when I was an officer, it was 0.10 before you could arrest. And anyhow, so I took this 3-day class, consumed the alcohol. I got up to a 0.07, and I just remember thinking, there is no way I would ever get behind the wheel of a car at a 0.07. It made such a huge impact on me that after that point, I started arresting drunk drivers for an impaired, rather than waiting 0.10, just for that very reason, because I realized how very, very dangerous alcohol in the system is. Anyhow, I digress. All right, so our very special guest, Keith, so let me introduce how we met. Now, this is going to be shocking, especially to my colleague over here, Jim, but I was at Starbucks one day, and I was having a cup of coffee. He's laughing. I was having a cup of coffee and got dialoguing with Keith here, and he was very forthright about explaining to me at the time that he had been arrested for drunk driving in the past, but that it had been a huge positive catalyst in his life and leading to his sobriety and so forth. So that's how we met, and I admire you being here, and I can't say enough about that. So, okay, so Keith, as an officer and in my personal life, I have some experience in some fields, whether it's mental illness or so forth, but what I am not familiar with on a personal level is substance abuse, alcoholism, and you were sharing a little bit that, I think it's fascinating the way you perceive things as an alcoholic or substance abuser, because I would never dream any of that. I just wouldn't. So you were indicating that probably after the fact of being arrested, your life as an alcoholic, from day to day, what was that like? Because I would imagine it involves a lot of lying, a lot of deception, a lot of, I'm guessing, manipulating, because you want to get your drink and you want wherever that is. So what is that just part of the positive reward that you were alluding to earlier, that you said, drinking wasn't the issue because you derive positives from that. Is that fair? You derive positive things from drinking, so these are just the things that would get you to that.
Yeah, I felt alcohol for some reason did something for me that I couldn't do for myself. I was more social, or at least I thought I was. I operated a business, as scary as that may sound. I drove a heavy equipment trailer around, doing landscape contracting. And I drank regularly, and even after I'd got in trouble, I still didn't really view it as a problem. I just didn't want to get caught, and I didn't think I was an out of control driver. I thought I drove pretty carefully, and yeah, my drinking caused me to lie to my family, to my friends. Not my friends who were drinking, but my wife, and like I said, I was introduced to AA, and I was working the steps to what I hear at meetings is the best of my ability, and that means I wasn't really doing Alcoholics Anonymous. But yeah, the threat of a drunk driving was just not sufficient for me. There's people that can take that the slap on the wrist or the threat of jail and do something different with their lives, and I just found I was unable to. And I know that a normal drinker wouldn't understand that. I do. I don't know if I understand it, but I experienced that.
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I really didn't. I got in trouble. I had a felony drunk driving in Bloomfield Hills in '99, and I didn't ever want to drink again. And I was absolutely certain that I was going to have the ability to do that. And you know, under the threat of the parole or probation I was on, I still managed to. I had a notion one day, and it struck me. So that's why I entered the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and again, this final time around, I've remained sober for 5 years now, and I attribute it all to Alcoholics Anonymous.
Okay.
You know, I can't say enough about it. I think it's commonly misunderstood what happens at those meetings, and there's a lot of myths about Alcoholics Anonymous. I think alcoholic really has to be beaten, and that's kind of scary news for a law enforcement officer, because you have some people out there that are drinking that I really believe don't have a choice whether they're drinking or not. They drink anyway, regardless of what the consequences are.
Okay. And that's the part, and we've only got a couple minutes, then we're going to cut to a film clip here in a couple minutes, but that's the part that intrigues me, I guess, as a law enforcement officer, is usually when you have penalties, right,
Correct.
for driving, whether it's speed or whatever, when you have penalties for a behavior, usually that curbs the behavior, but you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying unless the person themselves come to grip with the facts that I am an alcoholic or I have a huge issue with alcohol, until they come to grips with that, they're just going to play the game and get through the system, do what they have to do, but the whole time their mind is still on staying, keep drinking.
It seems that way. In my experience, I've seen people that had everything to lose, and that included me, and I would continue the same behavior. In the book, the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says we cannot tell the difference between the true and the false, and it says to them, and they mean an alcoholic. To them, their alcoholic life is the only normal one. I knew it didn't seem normal to the world, but it kind of seemed like something I got used to.
And when people told you, when your wife, others said, hey, Keith, man, you got yourself an issue, you got a problem with this drinking, what did you attribute those comments to?
I mean, I would agree with it. I was baffled myself. I didn't know why that I couldn't take the threat of getting committed to jail or penitentiary or something. I had no idea. I was baffled myself because I didn't want. I obviously didn't want to go to jail.
Sure.
That wasn't part of my plan.
Right.
When I started out the evening.
Sure.
Like,
sure.
I'm gonna go out to
Right.
the bar. I'm gonna be in jail by 11:30 p.m. That was never my plan.
Okay. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on the show and sharing your story. Okay, if you guys are all set on your end, let's cut to the first clip that I have here of alcohol and the effects on the brain. So whenever you're ready.
The heart then pumps the absorbed alcohol to every part of the body, including the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord, and it gets to the brain really fast. So that's why even after just one drink, you can feel lightheaded or relaxed. Alcohol acts primarily on the nerve cells within the brain and interferes with communication between nerve cells and all other cells, slowing everything down. And that's why when we drink even a little, we experience the effects of alcohol on our emotions, judgment, balance, memory, speech, and anger levels, just to name a few. Did you know that your brain is still developing until you're around 20 to 25? So we need to be really careful because alcohol can do some irreversible damage to various parts of our brains. For example, drinking affects the cerebral cortex, which controls our senses, and inhibitory centers, which is why when you drink, you become more talkative, more self-confident, and less socially inhibited. It also controls our thought processes, so alcohol affects our ability to make good judgment or think clearly. The brain's frontal lobes are important for planning, forming ideas, making decisions, and using self-control. So when alcohol affects the frontal lobes of the brain, you may find it hard to control emotions and urges, and you may act without thinking, and even sometimes become violent or act completely out of character. Does this sound familiar? The cerebellum is important for coordination, thinking, and being aware. So again, you may have trouble with these skills when alcohol affects the cerebellum. That's why people affected by alcohol sometimes can't walk properly or lose their balance and fall. The hippocampus is the part of the brain where memories are made. So when alcohol reaches the hippocampus, you may have trouble remembering something you just heard, or even worse, have a blackout and not be able to remember what you did last night. If alcohol damages the hippocampus, you may find it hard to learn or remember things in the future.
Okay, Jim, we were talking a little bit at break, and let's talk a little bit about the field sobriety. Now they're called, I mean, this has been so long for me since I worked a midnight shift.
Standardized field sobriety tests.
Okay,
Yep.
so standard field sobriety tests, and these are the evaluations that an officer would normally give you on the roadway at the time if they suspect in what they've observed so far in your driving and your behavior that there's a likelihood that you're driving impaired. So you would be asked to complete these. The biggest thing I've always heard of my career, and you can comment with what you hear, but these are tricks by law enforcement so they can arrest you for drunk driving. I don't know. I laugh only because it's like, even if I could, even if officers could trick you at the roadside and you get to the station where you're going to blow on the breathalyzer that registers and it comes up, 0.02 or some dismal number, how in the world are you going to explain that? So, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me, but anyhow, that's what I hear. All right, so go ahead, and if you could just explain to the audience a little bit with regard to the field evaluation.
So the standardized field sobriety test is something that every police officer gets trained with. It's essentially the bare minimum for detecting impaired drivers. Now nowadays there's actually 2 steps above that, and I've been trained in the I've been trained in the step above that. It's called ARIDE. It stands for Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Detection Enforcement, I believe. And it's just another tool with another two tests that will also help detect if you're under the influence of marijuana, any kind of other narcotic. Okay. And then above that, which is the most trained, essentially OWI officers, are DREs. And DRE stands for Drug Recognition Expert, and they are essentially a doctor cop. They carry around a stethoscope. They'll take your blood pressure, and they have to go through a ridiculous amount of training. At least 3 weeks, I believe. They go out to Arizona, and they evaluate all these intoxicated people coming into their jails, and they have to determine what drugs they're on, methamphetamine, cocaine, etc. Which is very interesting. It's something that I would like to get into eventually. And I believe we have 2 here at the department as of now.
Oh, wow.
2 DREs. So
okay.
They get called out to assist other agencies if they have somebody stopped, for that they believe is under the influence of some kind of drug.
Okay.
But back to the SFSTs, a lot of people they say they're tricks. They're not tricks. They're scientifically proven, because back in, I believe it was the 80s and 90s, these tests were developed out west in California. Especially the first test that we usually give, it's called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, which essentially looks at the involuntary jerking of your eyes. And that test, I believe, don't quote me, is about 86% accurate in determining whether a driver is above a .08. So we're looking for, involuntary jerking of your eyes, and there's, different kinds of nystagmus. You can have nystagmus if you've been involved in a crash, if you have some kind of brain injury. So our job is to, eliminate all those other kinds of nystagmus and essentially confirm that this nystagmus is being caused by the alcohol. So that test right there, if I could do one test for a drunk driver, that would be it. And I usually have pretty good success if I see any kind of nystagmus that they probably are well over the legal limit. And there's even another step above that is vertical nystagmus. Oh, wow. And if you have vertical nystagmus, you probably have drank more alcohol than your body's used to, processing, which usually ends up resulting in a high BAC arrest, which the high BAC is a .17 or above. And the other tests that we have, walk and turn, one leg stand, we have alternates doing those tests too. If you're not, if there's something wrong with you, or your knees, have been involved in a crash, etc. You know, you can count the alphabet and all these other tests too, you know, manual dexterity. Regarding alcohol, your, you know, manual dexterity, your fingers, they don't work as, you know, it's divided attention, essentially, is what we're trying to do with these tests. You know, make you do one thing while counting out loud. So the alcohol impairs that ability for you to do those two things at the same time. So that's where, you know, we detect it, and that's where we get our probable cause to arrest. So.
Okay, outstanding. And give us one, we call them war stories, Beck. But
We have those too.
give us just, and the only reason I bring this out isn't to, you know, make fun of somebody else, because we're going to see a couple of video clips. But again, it's to emphasize how very dangerous it is when you've reached the kind of BACs that we're talking about, and the impact that it has on your driving and eventually on somebody else. It's just a matter of time. That's all it is. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So go ahead, give us.
I have two that stand out in my mind. One of the more recent ones that I had, it was a felony OWI case. I was actually doing a check of our parks here in town, and it's actually right, we have to cross railroad tracks to get to the park. And it was probably 3 o'clock in the morning, remember looking down the railroad tracks and seeing brake lights on. And I said, there probably shouldn't be any brake lights on a railroad track. So I pull my patrol vehicle down and investigate. And that's when I hear the revving of an engine and, you know, wheels spinning, see the wheels spinning in the car. So I let dispatch know that we had a vehicle on the railroad tracks and to stop all the trains. So after making contact with the driver, I observed that he was still trying to get his car off of the railroad tracks. Now, he had actually framed out his car to where he couldn't move his vehicle on top of the railroad tracks. So he was stuck there, absolutely stuck. Could not get his car out if he absolutely wanted to. So in talking to him, you know, slurred speech, I had a very strong odor of intoxicants coming from the car, so I had him step outside and, you know, perform the sobriety test. And it turns out he had 2 prior convictions, which qualified him for the felony OWI. So he ended up getting charged with that. But and just thinking about that, if I hadn't been through there,
Exactly.
a train could have come through there, and the result probably would not have been good.
Right.
So
I'm curious in that, and it's funny as you were talking about that, I remember working day shift, the very same scenario. Somebody called about, in fact, it was north of there, and he was still there at 8 o'clock in the morning from the previous night. But anyhow, so getting back to that, do you remember anything that he said, I mean, upon your initial arrival, and there he is, you know, it's hard to say, what was he thinking, or where did he, in his mind, where did he think he was, and what did he think he was stuck on? But do you remember any of his?
So some of the things he told me, I asked him, you know, where are you heading? Where are you coming from? He said he was coming from a bar downtown, and that he was following his GPS, headed back to Belleville, which is probably not the best way to take the way that he was at. He said he was following his GPS, which was kind of hard to believe that somebody could follow a GPS down railroad tracks. And he had followed the railroad tracks probably for a good 100 yards.
My gosh.
And just thinking about that, after that night, I felt, you know, I saved this guy's life.
Absolutely.
He could have absolutely been hit by a train. There's trains that come through there all the time.
Absolutely. Remember what his BAC finally was?
I believe he was a .18. I know he was high BAC, so.
My gosh.
Yeah, that was one of my more memorable ones. And then another, it was an additional felony OWI that I had. I was just doing stationary traffic enforcement, and it was the simplest thing that I pulled this car over for, an expired plate. It expired a couple months. And in talking with the driver, I found that he had a suspended license. I saw that he had some prior OWI arrests, and he had a warrant, I believe, from another jurisdiction. So in talking with him, I had him in the backseat of my patrol vehicle, and I just remember smelling the odor of intoxicants coming from him. And I said, "Had you had anything to drink?" And he said, "You know, not since last night." And mind you, it was 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, I went through our procedures. I had brought him back to our station to arrest him for, you know, driving on a suspended license. So in talking with him and processing him at the station, I continued to smell that odor. And it's a very distinct odor if, you know, you haven't smelled it before. You know, when you're the sober one, and it's different when you drink with everybody else. But when you're sober and there's somebody very intoxicated, it's a very distinct smell. And I continued to smell that in our station. So I said, I'm going to ask you to take a preliminary breath test. And sure enough, he agreed to take it, and it was a .21. And the fascinating thing about this guy is that he must have been probably the highest functioning alcoholic that I ever dealt with. There was hardly any slurred speech. There was hardly any nystagmus when I did do a test. And he ended up refusing to take the data master test. So I had to then get a search warrant for a blood draw. Right. But that was just amazing how, expired plate turned into a felony OWI arrest. And it's just, especially at the time of the day, it was very unusual for me.
Yeah,
So.
I get it. Okay, Keith, I'm having a difficult time trying to make the most out of having you here as a guest. So rather than me messing this up with all the wrong questions and so forth, I'll let you just kind of free narrative. But what I would really appreciate is you're talking from an alcoholic's point of view with regard to how you saw the world from day to day. I mean, you've said a number of fascinating things that I have found very, very interesting and actually thought-provoking in a number of ways. Because I can see that, I, or even law enforcement at times, is thinking over here, and an alcoholic, and we're talking about alcoholics here, are thinking over here completely, you know what I mean? So that alone I find really interesting. So maybe you could just kind of free narrative and take as best you're able to us into an alcoholic's cognitive world, how they process things, how they process, like you said earlier, process the whole judicial system at times with, instead of seeing it like a wake-up call, you look at it like it sounds to me like an obstacle course. Okay, this is the obstacle course I'm going to need to run to complete this program. I can do that. And then after that, I'm going out and having a drink with my friends kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I'll let you free narrative, and then if you could just kind of comment on, again, end it with, what was the wake-up call? Was it the arrest, or was it something that somebody said, or what was the catalyst that kind of got you?
Well, I can't speak for alcoholics as a whole. I can only speak for myself. I know that alcohol took a big part of my life. It started to take a large portion of the way I had to operate to continue drinking. I did own a landscape company, which allowed me to drink around the clock, and I couldn't get fired. So I was my own worst boss. As far as the things that we have in common, I mean, there's probably judges that are alcoholics, there's doctors that are alcoholics or use substances. We might appear very normal in our day-to-day activities. But there's kind of there's what they call in our basic text is we lead a double life. I'm presenting my stage character. Most of the time, I'm really just trying to figure out how to dodge my boss so that I can have a drink, and that could be found in somebody. Maybe somebody on the street doesn't have that same problem about dodging anyone, but and regardless of the career, there's like two hallmarks in Alcoholics Anonymous, and one of them is that that once I start drinking, I have little control over the amount I take, and when I stopped, really the question is, have I been able to stay stopped? Those might be the only things I have in common. I mean, you could be a professor at University of Michigan, or you could have been arrested on a felony drunk driving, and really the things that, I mean, our lives all look different because there's there's plenty of different types of people, but to back it up, they talk about this, this is not really technical, but it's like they talk about us being selfish and self-centered, and not really recognizing it. And the danger is that, because there's another thing, that I'm physically different than other people. An alcoholic is wired differently, and I think medicine supports that. Like you alluded to your story, the one guy had a 0.2 or lot higher of alcohol content than you did when you had 0.07, right. And he was functioning normally.
Right.
So that's the thing. I think sometimes you get this idea that a drunk is slurring his speech and all that things, and that's not necessarily so. I think that some alcoholics are highly functioning, but eventually, they start to lose control of their drinking, and that's what happened to me. I had got to the point where and I'm not really ashamed to say this, but I was living at my mother's. I'd lost my place in Ann Arbor. I didn't have an arrest, but it was pulled over for open intoxicants in Detroit and some other issues, and I just became disgusted with myself. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I was, unfortunately, or whatever it took, I was taking money from my mom and going to the liquor store in the morning, and sleeping about 2 hours a day. And trust me, I wasn't having any fun. I just felt like I couldn't stop, and I finally got myself admitted to a hospital. And it's funny that the doctor at this treatment center hospital I went to said, "How many treatment centers have you been to?" And I've been to quite a few, 15.
Wow.
And he said, "You need to work the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm discharging you tomorrow morning." I came to Ann Arbor. I've been sober ever since. I started following directions in Alcoholics Anonymous. The program didn't work too good for me when I wasn't following directions, and I had this belligerent type of like, you can't tell me anything. I already know everything. I know how the world's supposed to be, and I found out that I needed to take a step back. And somebody had told me it's like the morality in Alcoholics Anonymous is not whether it's bad or whether it's good. Is it working? Is this producing? Are you getting the life that you want? And how are you? My sponsor said, look at what a fine job you've been doing running your life. And I was a little angry with him. I thought, well, then he said, you need to set aside all you think you know about Alcoholics Anonymous for a new experience, because the way you're going. He said the score's 100-0, my friend. And he was very blunt with me, and I appreciate it. I mean, I love that man until this day, and I really didn't know what I was dealing with. I did not know on how strong a pull or how alcoholism. I couldn't even see that it was destroying my life, and I got help. And it's kind of the funny thing is, it's like we have the saying, if you can't keep it if you don't give it away. So, and so I've become less interested in my little designs and more interested in what I can contribute to society, even to the police, or what have you. I put a post on Facebook that the only thing the police used to ask me to do is produce my driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. They asked me if I'd been drinking, and that was if I stopped. I had run from the police, and that was very dangerous. I'm not proud of that. I could have hurt somebody, and I look back and I said, my God, it's like, thank God I didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
Well,
I can't thank you enough for being here, man. Your courage speaks a lot to me, and I mean that on a personal level. So, and I was going to ask you something earlier. Now it's completely gone out of my mind, so we might have to come back to it.
Okay.
Let's cut to the two films that I have here with regard to drunk drivers that were arrested. When you guys are ready, I'm ready.
This is ABC. Right now at the Home Depot, take 10% off Energy Star appliances of $398 or more. Plus, get instant savings every day with free delivery and haul away, which combined can save you up to an additional $79. No rebates, no hassles. Brands like GE, Maytag, and LG are more affordable than ever thanks to 10% off Energy Star appliances and free delivery. More savings, more doing. That's the power of the Home Depot. Through March 31st, U.S. only. See store for details. Are you struggling with too much credit card debt? Sky-high interest rates?
I got a fire, come on. I feel like you're Boylan.
Credit card.
cut the tire. Smell that tire burning?
Just about over, or too early. Spring's practically here. To think about saving. What Navajo Feed Store means by this is, with the government tax credit of 30% up to $1,500, now's the time to buy a Lennox pellet stove and save. In fact, Navajo Feed Store will even pay your sales tax on a new Lennox pellet stove now till April 3rd, so you can save even more. Don't wait. Buy your Lennox pellet stove now. So save it.
Okay, back in. I did remember the question I was going to ask you, Keith, as we saw that, and then we'll comment on this briefly. I have a good friend who has been sober for 35 years, and he too swears by AA for a number of reasons. But what I would like you to do is if you could just summarize in one sentence,
No promises.
do the best you can. One sentence, why, in your opinion, is AA so effective, at least for you? Why was it the turning point? Why? In one sentence, though.
There was nothing left I hadn't tried thoroughly.
So this was it.
They have this little part, those who do not recover, and this is read at almost every AA meeting, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to the simple program. And what I had realized is I had never done that, and I had no place left to go.
And it sounded like this was a cumulative effect in your life with regard to alcohol. That is, all these factors kept encroaching until finally you found yourself, painted in a corner.
I had no place left to turn, and I just, my sponsor from AA, when we have sponsors, they call them sponsors, but a kind of a guidance, a man that gives you directions, or a woman. Yeah, he said, what do you have to lose?
Okay. And I'm guessing, but would you have been receptive to those same messages with the therapist or whatever at the 6 months prior to that? Would you have been receptive, and would you have heard them? Or do you think it's just a matter, for you, it was just a matter of time and, like you said, losing everything else that found you in that?
Yeah, I mean, when is enough was not enough until I was beaten, and that's like that. That's what we have a book called The Basic Text, and says some of us had to be pretty badly beaten. So I was told not everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous is an alcoholic, and I didn't quite understand that. There's different types of drinkers, which the book goes over in detail. But there are some people that can just stop and maybe attend meetings, and then there's people that just for whatever reason they can't wrap their head around it, or they still want to hold on to doing things their way. And I think for the alcoholic, for the real alcoholic. And that's a term that's derived from our big book. We have to determine whether we're one of them or not. I mean, if my way hasn't been working, but if people are welcome in AA, whether they're really with drinking issues, not everybody that has a drinking issue is an alcoholic. And so, anyhow.
I have found you just being on the show invaluable to me. So hopefully we'll run into you at Starbucks again. I'm rarely there, Jim, but. Maybe we'll run into you. Hey, so we'll cut to Jim real quick, and then we gotta call it. But as you watch these clips, reflect on your own career, the drunk drivers you've arrested. What were your thoughts, or what are your thoughts with regard to, when you finally get these intercede for these folks, get them arrested, when you see them in the circumstances you've seen them in, you spoke to a couple of those earlier. Is there a prevailing thought that comes to your mind when you reach these folks?
Yeah, the main thought that I have is that I hope that they will learn their lesson, and they will realize that there are other options available. Nowadays, you have Uber, you have Lyft, you have God knows how many taxi services. There are safe ways for you to get home. Call somebody, call a friend, but I just hope that they realize that they made a mistake. we're human. We all make mistakes, but it's not the end of their life, you know, and that they learn from it and obviously never do it again. That's my main goal. That's why I do those, because, like I said, people make mistakes. I just want them to obviously go home safe along with everybody else out on the roads.
Good closing words. And Keith, you wanted to share something with the audience?
Yeah, I believe I'm obscured. My name is Keith. I am an alcoholic. The purpose for my visit, I was invited by Officer Cooey. Is that
Quite
correct?
close
Coy.
enough, my friend.
Coy. To speak here today to share my own experience with drinking, the trouble it caused me, and how I've recovered from alcoholism. I do not represent AA. Any opinions I express are based on my own experience of Alcoholics Anonymous and understanding. The history of Alcoholics Anonymous is AA was founded when Bill Wilson, a stock speculator, and an Ohio surgeon, Dr. Bob Smith, both now deceased, first met in the year 1935. Both men suffered from drinking and its effects and formed what became Alcoholics Anonymous in an effort to help others to get and stay sober, and the simple idea that doing so may help them stay sober themselves. What is AA? AA is this is from our preamble, AA is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are fully self-supporting through our own contributions. We do not solicit any contributions from any government sources or corporations. If we did, we would lose our identity. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, either endorses or opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help others to achieve sobriety. And the reason I'm here anonymously, everybody always has trouble with that at the meetings. Anonymity is a necessary element for several reasons. Since there are people who'd rather it not be known that they were in AA, possibly doctor, police officer, or our 12th tradition protects their privacy. We are also directed to remain anonymous at the level of press, radio, and film, which this would qualify. This is generally honored for the simple fact that if someone in the public eye went on a drunk, people might get the idea that Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. We have open and closed meetings. You're welcome to attend an open meeting for information. Closed meetings are for people that have a desire to stop drinking. And just real briefly, I don't know if they can put this on a card or something, but there's locally you can contact the Huron Valley Intergroup. Their number is 734-482-0707. They also have a website, it's hvai.org. There's AA.org, and there's some other 12-step programs that you can find. Locally, there's the Washtenaw Alano Club that is not allied with AA, but has a lot of meetings, so that might be a good place to start. That's all I have. Thank you.
Outstanding. Keith, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate your courage in being here, and I've learned a lot, and hopefully
this is a new experience for me.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that concludes this episode of Ann Arbor Shield. Tip of the week. I've got to do this on the fly a little bit. It's a long story, but the tip of the week would be this. Especially in law enforcement, you find out real quick as a new officer that there are two sides to every story. So that's the tip of the week to you, and what I mean by that. I think you're all intelligent enough to know what I mean by that. But unfortunately, in this day and age, especially fed by the media, there's a perception, and that's reality immediately. And I'm just asking you to consider, I wonder what the other side of this story is, or I wonder what, didn't Walter Cronkite used to say in the rest of the story, or is that Paul Harvey? Paul Harvey. Anyhow, with that, I bid you adieu, and we'll see you on the next episode of Ann Arbor Shield.